Good morning, welcome to the Hobby Breakfast Show, and we're going to be having a look today at, I suppose, the concept of collecting in Middle Earth and why we collect different things. I'm joined today by Mayor.
Hello.
OT, although he's not actually in the main recording with us, but he has done some pre-recorded ideas, so...
Hello, I'm OT.
Yeah. Myself, Onod, and then also we are joined today by Sebastian.
Hello.
So I suppose we'll just sort of jump straight in. The topic of conversation is why do we collect armies? What is our thought process and all of that kind of stuff. So we're going to start off with kind of where do our initial ideas for collecting an army come from? And I've kind of loosely kind of gone like, is it like a lore-based thing? Do you think of an army in terms of like you want it to be good in game, or you like the way that it plays? Is it because you want to like paint them? There's probably more suggestions, but like those are the kind of things that sprang to mind for me. Mayor, do you want to start us off? Let's take one of your classics, like Goblin Town, for example. What was the spark that made you think, I want Goblin Town?
Well, I'm just a power gamer. No. I don't know. I think I have a lot of armies that are seen as quite competitive, but I also have a few armies that I try to take if I'm not going to be competitive. As Sebastian knows from us trying to do the occasional doubles tournament together, in SBG especially, I'm not very good at finding a balance between trying to be competitive and not being competitive. Sometimes I'll bring a list that I think, I don't mind how this goes. In a tournament context, I don't mind if I lose all my games or win all my games. But even if the list is like it could do well, or it could do, like top third sort of area, I'll be disappointed if I don't do that. So I'm setting myself up for failure, as opposed to just thinking I'm going to bring Thorin's Company and just have a laugh and do what I think Thorin's company would do. It's the same thing I did when I used to collect 40k. I played Orcs because I thought they were cool at the time, and I still think they're cool. I've still got my Orcs. And I think there are a lot of parallels between Orcs in 40k and Goblin Town, perhaps. I don't tend to look for model counts or... I seem to be playing Horde armies all the time.
Yeah.
And maybe you two can offer some insight, because I honestly don't know why that happens.
I think you just gravitate towards... like a min-maxing element, and I think you've always found yourself gravitating towards I'm just gonna maximize bodies and minimize the sort of big hero side of stuff in every game.
Yeah, it seems. I mean, even in Isengard, to a degree, that's true, isn't it?
So if you're actually going to go in and buy like a new army, are you thinking to yourself, like, immediately, this is either an army which I'm going to be like trying to win events in, or it's an army that I just don't care? Or is it more that you start an army and then you just find that it leads one way or the other?
I think I tend to... I definitely check, is the army that I'm getting here a competitive army or a not competitive army? And that will influence the way that I build the lists and what I buy, because far too often, or I see it happen to other people as well, they'll get an army and then they'll realise that it plays differently to how they want to play, or it just doesn't suit them in terms of play style, or it's not what they were expecting. And for me, it has to be a combination of, I think this army is cool, I can see how I'm going to paint it, and it also plays in a way that I want it to play. And for me, that is either fairly competitively or just fluffy.
Interesting, yeah. I feel like this would be a good time to splice in OT. So where does your initial idea for an army come from? What would be the first thing that you think of?
I normally think it comes from God. Like, I think it's like a direct line from the heavens into my brain. It's how it normally works. More seriously, I think I normally pick like one model that I really want to use. And then, I mean, I don't like to think of myself as a massive tryhard, but I do end up trying to optimize the list as well as possible around it.
Because you are a massive tryhard. When you say you pick a model, is it based on like the lore of the model, the look of the model, or the rules for the model, do you think?
I think it's generally, because I'm a massive hipster, it has to be a model that nobody else really uses. And I want to try and make it, well, nobody I've seen use. So, like, I don't know, like the Eagles, and then, like, I'd never played against Riv Knights, so I want to see how Riv Knights worked. And I think it's just like, it's stuff that I want to know how it works, tends to be what I normally use.
I kind of get that. I also tend to go for stuff that other people don't go for.
What about you?
Yeah, so I think that I'm much more lore and miniature driven in terms of how I go about it. I think for me, an initial idea either comes from a particular model that I really like, and I'm like, I want that model, not necessarily because of the rules, but because I like the model. And then I'm like, how can I now build a fluffy list around said thing? Or I look and I'm like, I like this lore idea, and I'm going to build a list around that. So, like, the army that I'm building at the moment, where it's kind of like, I was like, I like this Airwind model. I want to build a force around it. Obviously, Airwind on foot is not really what you'd want in a Rohan list. So I was like, how can I do Airwind on foot? Well, I could ally her with an army that would make sense on foot. And then I was looking at Ministerial, and I was like, oh, there's a nice lore link here because I can do Faramir and Eowyn. They're both characters I like. So that's kind of, I think, where my slightly meandering brain goes. And it's not really until I think the stage where I'm already starting to collect it that I actually start seriously thinking about list building. Like, I probably already bought the model on eBay, but before I actually start going, oh, I actually need to make a list around this sort of thing. So yeah, quite different from you. And I think that I would say I'm less bothered by play style in terms of when I'm thinking about list building. I think if I enjoy the theme of an army enough, I'm happy to go with its play style. Like, if I have to sit back and shoot, then I'll sit back and shoot. If I have to charge in, I'll charge in. If I am going to have to use monsters and try and do that sort of thing, I'll do that. So yeah, very kind of different, I think.
You tend to find that, because I think in a way you might enjoy the challenge of finding that playstyle within the less competitive lists. Do you find that that's true at all, or?
I think I like playing less competitive lists, and I think that I would probably go so far as to say that I'm actively put off playing competitive lists just because I'm not interested in it, and I don't want to play a game where somebody thinks that, like, I'm that guy. So I just don't. But then I don't.
You don't have to be that guy to play competitive.
No, sure.
Like,
I don't
like
think I'm really.
Hopefully, I'm not just bringing lists because they're competitive, for example.
I think it can be implied though if you turn up to a tournament and you are rocking like the host of the Dragon Emperor, and you know it's very maxed out on a lot of things. Like, your opponent's going to have the thought of, this guy's brought this list to try and win, even if you know you're liking the models or that you like the theme or the you know the way the list plays. I think that there is still that kind of background. Oh, this guy's taking this to win, even if that's not your main objective. It kind of still feels bad.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, Sebastian. I think that there is kind of like an implication, and sure, once you're playing the game, you might realize that's not the case. But it's sort of like I don't even want it to get to that point where, you know, you have to start rolling dice to realize that's not where it's at. To be honest, I think I naturally gravitate towards kind of underdogs. So I think I've only ever been in one situation where I actually wanted to collect a list that was competitive, should we say, which was the Bjornings. And I didn't end up doing it just because I was like, this isn't going to be a fun experience for me or my opponent. And that probably did override the sort of enjoyment of the models. I think price probably came into Bjornings as well a little bit, to be honest, because
accessibility of it is
it's a bit
hard.
spenny. Yeah. Sebastian, where do you start then with the collection?
So I'd say my collecting kind of has evolved over time. I initially very much looked at the miniatures and the models and saw them as like, what's my favorite faction from the Lord of the Rings like movies, and I'd really love Rivendell. I'd go, right, just gonna play Rivendell, gonna really enjoy it because I like the idea, the kind of immersion of it. But then it would slowly evolve to, I'm getting really into my painting. What are the sort of models that I want to bring? What kind of like snapshot from the movie can I have? Is there some color scheme that I really enjoy? Like, almost what color scheme can I use that would apply to the models? So it's almost like, oh, I really want to do a Japanese themed army. What's going to be the best fit for that? Oh, Easterlings. And you kind of do it that way. But then as time went on, like now that I've kind of tried to chill out about maxing the sort of hobby painting side of the tournaments, I now kind of have that completionist kind of idea where I want to make sure that no matter what, I can sort of take any of the heroes in a single army and have a smattering of troops of all sorts like available to me for each tournament, because I kind of have like this weird fear of things going out of production. And there's a lot of old models.
Tell us about your
I wonder where that comes
Royal
from.
Guard.
So I'm currently working on Rohan, which has basically every hero footer mounted that you could have, including a lot of older sculpts and multiple versions of heroes, just because I might want to play, the old fine cast Theoden in comparison to the new plastic one and all that kind of stuff. And I've got a lot of Royal Guard, which was also partially done because I knew that Games Workshop were going to raise their prices. So I did a big sort of splurge on the foot Royal Guard, because there was 3 in a pack for £8.20. I think I ended up getting about 12 packs. And now I can just have an all foot Rohan army with throwing spears, and that's an option for me now. And it's kind of like, what might I want to take to a 1,000 point game? Like that's kind of the ultimate. Like, if I was to have 1,000 points of just troops, what troops would I want to bring? And is there like a specific theme that I'd want? So, for example, I don't have any Outriders. I don't have any Sons of Earl. So it's just like Riders, Royal Guard. That's kind of it. Like, because I know that when I'm playing Rohan, those are the models that I want to do, or all heroes. So I very much kind of think like, in a 1,000 point game, if I was to go to Throne of Skulls, what would that army look like? And then I kind of add a couple of heroes here and there for flexibility at those like smaller points. So yeah, that's kind of how I would do my collection.
Yeah, and actually this beautifully segues in, because what you were talking about there kind of links into what I was hoping we'd move in terms of, once you have the idea, well, like, where do you go and why do you buy what you buy? So you've kind of developed into, you like want everything available to you, and then you can build your list from it. So you can kind of like open up the gaming case or the shelf that you've got your army on, and you can just like pick the models off that you want.
Yeah, but it's I kind of do that in a weird process, because I almost don't have that development. I very much batch paint, and so if I'm doing an army, I will do every single model in that army that's possible at the same time. So so for my Rivendell, for example, I just had all of the heroes, all of the troops, batch painted everything at the same time, and now I just have Rivendell as an option, and I can just go right. I'm playing a 800-point game. Do I want to take Glorfindel, Gil-galad, or Elrond? I can just pick one, and then sort of go right. I want a captain and Círdan, and then just cherry pick the troops afterwards. But as a completionist, I don't feel the need to have everything. Like, I don't have every single option, and I also don't collect all armies. Otherwise, I think I'd be bankrupt. I can't afford to do that. I definitely choose those factions that I go, right, dwarves. Like, the only dwarves that I kind of like are Khazad-dûm, so I guess I'll just max out on Khazad-dûm. Evil factions, like I like Harad, Easterlings. Like, I don't have any Mordor or like Angmar, like all those kind of factions. Like, I don't know why, just doesn't appeal to me as much. But yeah.
Yeah, because I do it in a very different way. I'm quite selective about the factions I dip into, like you. But my brain is almost like, I build a list. Like, once I know what I want to do and I know the theme, I work out what I'm gonna get. I work out then the list, probably based a little bit on what the models I want is, and then I always have like a list set in stone. And then I will only play it at that points level, which probably sounds like super odd for a game like Middle-earth, where no one plays at a consistent points level. But I'm always kind of like, if I'm going to play a 500-point game, I'll play with my Ents.
Yeah.
If I'm going to play a 400-point game, I'll play with the Trolls, or I'll play with Shire. If I'm going to play a 600-point game, I'll use Grey Company. And like, I think it's just because for me, I don't want to have made my Grey Company list and then have to take stuff out.
Yeah, like, I get that, but do you sometimes think, like, if you've gone to a tournament, for example, and you've played that 500-point game, and you've taken Ents, do you come away from the tournament thinking, I wonder if like I could try something else at 500 points if that would have gone better, or is it just like it does not matter? Like, if it's 500 points, you're playing that army. Like, do you have like that flexibility? Because for me, part of the reason why I collect the different armies is to have like a variation of playstyle, because otherwise I think if I was always playing like Khazad-dûm dwarves at 500, I'd kind of go, I just wonder if Rohan would be better, and you know, you can kind of do that and you can try it out, and you just have those different flexible playstyles.
I think I do, but I don't think I do it in the same way as you. I think I would be like, I want to play something different at 500 points. I'll start a new collection. Because this is where like I have 3 Rohan forces, and they aren't the same army. I have Helm, Hammerhand for like small 300 to 400 point games. I'm building AMS Riders to do like midpoint games.
Yeah.
And then I'm doing my Alliance of Minas Tirith to do like bigger point games.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're the same as me, Sebastian. If I have armies that are like based differently, I don't want them on the table at the same time.
Yes. Yeah, I very much. I mean, I don't think I've ever taken an ally to a tournament because I always have pure lists. I can't face having different bases.
Yeah, and I'm the same. So I've kind of shot myself in the foot because I was like, I want my Helm list to have a snow base because that fits the theme.
Yeah.
But then my AMS Riders are like quite like barren, scrubby because I want it to be like they're outside Helm's Deep in the movie.
Yeah.
And then my ones that are being allied with Gondor are not only being painted blue so that they fit with the Gondor, but they're also getting like an autumnal basing. So now I'm like, those are different armies. They can't go together, even though they can. But in my brain, I'm like, no, I don't want that.
That's the exact same for me. I kind of had like, that's also why I do it all in one go, because I kind of have to plan in my head, like, am I okay with never allying Rohan with Lothlorien? And I kind of go, yeah, because like I don't care that much to make a more competitive list by allying them together. Like, I'd rather just play Riders of Theoden or pure Lothlorien as this is the army I'm going to take to the tournament. But I also have like wider themes that kind of overlap. So there are some things that can overlap. So all of my elves, for example, so Mirkwood, Lothlorien, and Rivendell, all have autumnal bases. So they can sort of merge together. So like Wood Elves, for example, can be part of the Rivendell force or Lothlorien. But like as a wider thing, like I don't have anything else that's autumnal. So all the Rohan stuff's going to be just the classic rolling plains. And if I ever, when I come to do Gondor, that's going to be more Skiliath runes and that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't feel right to put them on the same like table, or like having a spear support with a different, different pace.
Yeah. Now, Matt, I'm gonna guess that you probably are slightly different to us when it comes to that. Like, you've got the idea. What are you gonna build?
Yes and no. Some of my armies, like Goblin Town, I have just, because there's not a lot of variation in that list. I have just, the first time I got it, I just bought everything I needed. I had like 200 goblins, all the heroes, and that was that. Whereas something like Isengard, which I've collected for a long time, Isengard was sort of my first SBG army. I remember buying the first bottle of warriors. That's how GW sells them now.
By the bottle,
first box of Uruk-hai warriors, and that's an army that you can't buy all at once because it's so diverse and you can field it in so many ways. The basing's an interesting topic because I don't think many of my factions, if any, really ally with each other, which I think I've just never had to think about that. Whereas Star Wars Legion, I've literally got the same base across 3 different factions, even though they can't ally apart from the mercenaries and I suppose my terrain. But other than that, so I think collecting, I'll generally start at a certain points level. And a bit like you, Onod, and then if I want to build further than that, I'll try and make sure that whatever I've bought already is going to contribute to that, and I'm not just buying the equivalent of a separate army. And I will generally try to build a list for a higher points level that will work at lower points level. So what would be an example of that? To be honest, most of the armies I have, I think, essentially just are the same thing at all points level. Fellowship and Thorin's Company, just sort of, you have to get them all. Return of the King, I mean, that's just Aragorn, the King of the Dead, and then dudes, and Legolas and Gimli. Goblin Town is just, you get everything. Isengard's probably the only one where I actually had to think about what I was going to get first. When we played War of the Ring, I had scouts. When we when that finally went away, I ended up selling all my scouts and buying more warriors, and that turned into a weird hybrid of feral Uruk-hai and berserkers and all sorts. But generally, I mean, I'm struggling to think of an army that I have that you don't just know what you need to buy and just buy it all.
Do you think that's like a product of you go to more tournaments than I do? So do you think that you just naturally like look for a list which is sort of like, I'm gonna take Goblin Town to tournaments this year, so therefore I need it to work at all points? So you just sort of naturally gravitate towards that sort of list?
That's an interesting point. I hadn't really thought about it that way. I think if I'm going to be playing a list, I want to feel capable with it. And so perhaps practicing with it at all points levels is something that I'm sort of subconsciously considering. I would say Goblin Town doesn't really work at like really high points, but I definitely prepared for using it at high points because I've got like over 1,000 points worth of them. Whereas now I figure they kind of work quite well at low and mid points levels, so I'd consider them for those, but I wouldn't consider them for higher points levels. Yeah, it's interesting. I sort of hadn't really thought about the way that I'd done that, but yeah, all my lists are just prime for basically any points level.
Yeah, which is kind of like the opposite of how I do it, which is where
Yeah, you pick 1 points level per army, basically. Yeah, cool.
we'll slot what OT said in here.
Thinking about it, I think like the central core of the army has to be models that I think would look cool or be really fun to use on the table. Like thinking about there's a couple of exceptions, but like the armies I built recently, like Eagles I picked up because I thought they would be cool. Iron Hills I got because you bought some for me and that kind of tied my hands.
You're welcome.
Thralls was like completionism because I was a bit OCD about it because I didn't have all the dwarves. And then I think recent army I'm looking at the moment, which I guess we'll come on to in a second, with Earl the Young and the Sons of Earl. I think I've always been kind of interested in collecting Rohan because you see it so often on the table and like it's really integral to the films. But as I mentioned earlier, I didn't want to do what everyone else was doing. So in the end, I ended up picking up what I think is quite a niche Rohan army in Earl the Young and some Gondor stuff.
And how big a part does lore play? Like, does it have to be a scene from the books or the movies, or are you not fussed about that sort of thing?
It's nice if it is, but it won't stop me if it's not. It's the way I think about it. Like, Thralls and Dale, I'm kind of happy, for instance, that is thematic in the sense that they, like, worked together. But I wouldn't say there was a particular scene from any of the films that really brought them together as a pair.
Fairly nicely segues on from what you were saying just at the end there, Mayor, about sort of refining an idea. And you were kind of talking there about how you take like a concept and you want to play it and you want to work out, you know, maybe what you need to add to the collection. In the case of Isengard, if you need to like adapt the list or change it, that sort of thing. Do you think for you it's purely like with Goblin Town, was it purely a case of I want to make this more competitive, I want to make this collection work better, and so you go and get like Gollum, for example, or is there a bit of a balance?
So for Goblin Town, it's a weird one because you basically get everything you need straight away because you kind of have to.
Yeah, maybe Isengard would be a better.
Yeah, I think Isengard. I mean, that's probably the only one where I've sort of added to the collection over time, as opposed to just buying everything I needed. Sebastian style at the beginning. That's definitely something that I added over time. You know, when we started playing War of the Ring, I mean, I'm sure anyone else who's played it knows the feeling of realizing you don't have quite enough warriors to fill the number of bases that you need, so you have to buy more. I remember one Christmas, Sebastian and I, we got loads of miniatures from our grandparents, and I got like 4 to 6 packets of like feral Urukai. It might have even, I think it might have been 6.
This was back in the good old days where that was probably like £5 a pack, though.
Yeah, where it was, they were actually available. So in that sense, I was adding them because they were competitive for War of the Ring, or at least I thought they were. Free to that, I mean, I just thought the Urukai were badass. So started with the warriors, started with Lurtz and Uglug. Had to get Saruman in there for some fun. Got some bombs. Got a ballista. I seem to remember playing the ballista even when we were at school, and firing that across the table and thinking that it was going to be really good, but it wasn't at the time for whatever reason. I think because Isengard has so many different playstyles, it's really easy to add to the collection to change how it plays, which can't really be said for a lot of other things that I have, like Goblin Town. You know, Goblin Town has one style, whereas Isengard doesn't. And I think that is a big boon for collecting them. And I think it's why they're probably my sort of OG faction. in the same way that I think maybe Rivendell is Sebastian's OG faction. Although you haven't got that much Rivendell now, have you? You've got them in boxes.
No, I've basically painted it all now.
Oh, you did paint them, yeah.
This actually, just to quickly cut in, Sebastian, because I wanted to ask you a slightly different question, because you're in a kind of unique position where this refining an idea with your Rivendell, you've not only refined your Rivendell idea, but you've actually recollected Rivendell on purpose. Was that purely just because you wanted to paint it differently? Or did
How
you
many times have you painted Rivendell?
Did you end up buying like different models?
So I'd say I've had Rivendell as an army 2 or 3 different times. The first time was, having those kind of bits from the eBay job lot that we got when we were little. They were already painted, so that was shifted rather quickly. And then I started to build up on them again, and they were my favorite faction, and I obviously was very excited to get them on the table. So when I was painting them up, I didn't know everything that I know now about painting, and so the results were, as you might expect, not quite as much sort of refined painting as perhaps one might develop after several years, almost an entire decade of painting practice. So going back over and looking at that army, it just made me not want to put it on the table because it wasn't as like intriguing and interesting to me as the newer stuff that I had put on the table. I would say that I hadn't. It was a very small collection. It was like Glorfindel without him being on horse. 1 box of Rivendell Knights, like maybe 2 or 3 packets of Spearmen, and then just the plastic warriors to fill out the ranks, and maybe like the old Last Alliance Elrond. It wasn't exactly what I'd call like a mustered force. Like it definitely needed to be redone for me to want to put it back on the table. And so I thought, using my new kind of found painting like techniques, I was like, right, okay, I'm just gonna repurchase it again, like just get a shot of it and use everything that I know now and just do it all in one go, which included doing things like buying a lot of the fine cast spearmen and then drilling the spears off and putting new swords in, and so I've got those like sword and shield options if I want. I've also got spear and bow options if I want. So there was also that development of knowledge about the game. So not just I'm going to build this kit how it's intended to be built. I was kind of looking at what does Rivendell need? Like you need those defense 6 warriors on the front line, and you may as well have a spear on your bow. Like all those kind of things that you pick up from playing. So that was also a big reason to sell it and recollect it, as it were.
You're mad, is what I'm hearing.
I get collecting
it.
stuff. Like I kind of accidentally recollected Hobbits. It wasn't intentional, but it was nice coming back to Hobbits once contrast paints are out and being able to get it actually to a standard where they don't look dreadful. Which I think Mayor agrees with me on that, in terms of it's nice to be able to actually get them on the table and it didn't take years.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. For me, this sort of like, where does a project go for refining? I don't really, as I kind of mentioned, I don't really do it. But I think the only thing that I'd add that like my mindset is I kind of want to get like value out of what I'm buying. So I'll very often like change a list that I've initially come up with a concept, just because I'm like, well, I want to get use out of the models. So like for Minas Tirith, I've bought a load of Citadel Guards. I have to buy the longbows with the spears. So my initial list idea was, because I knew that Rangers with spears would be just, probably more useful, I've actually ended up taking them out and putting in the Citadel Guard longbow, because I'm like, if I've got to buy them, I want to use them. So that's the only thing that I'd really kind of say about that kind of like latter stage thing. I'm like, if I have models lying around, I want to think of a way to use them. And sometimes I might end up then plonking them into a new list idea because I'm like, oh, I have some Riders of Rohan lying around. I can do Airmes Riders, which I think is really cool. And, you know, it's then a nice excuse to get Gandalf the White, who I think the model's really cool, the plastic model. So I think that's where my mind goes to with refining, not necessarily refining a list, but kind of thinking of creative ways to use
value.
Yeah, use what
I
I've
suppose
got.
because you're going to be not using, you know, when you build a list, like you're saying, it's for a certain points level. You might not get as much value from it because of that, and therefore finding the value in the way that you are is actually quite useful, or at least a lot more useful than like finding that cross purpose for a model is useful in the same way as just buying an entire army, like Sebastian and I tend to do.
Yeah, and I think for me, I'm probably a lot more kind of like the value in this stuff largely comes from hobby rather than playing for me. Like I'm reasonably happy to buy an army that I know I'm only going to play occasionally, and it's not going to be a kind of workhorse that I'm playing week in, week out. And I'm kind of come to terms with that. I know that the main
thing sounds
thing.
So depressing.
Well, no, it's like because I know a lot of people would probably look at me and be like, "You spend like it's a cheap hobby compared to a lot of them, but if you're spending like 200 quid on an army, and then you're basically only going to play it like maybe once a year, I imagine a lot of people be like, that's mad. But for me, I think I'm happy because I'm getting hours of hobby out of it. So
yeah, we all enjoy hobby in different ways, right?
We'll quickly cut in and see what OT said about that.
I'm very averse to feeling like, and this is going to be a completely stupid statement, but I'm very averse to feeling like I'm getting ripped off when it comes to like collecting models. So like, it's often about, because Eagles, for instance, feel like really good value, but they actually aren't that incredible in terms of like the points you get per pound. But because it feels like you're getting, a cool model that looks good on the table, I feel like that's something that feels better. In the same way, like, even if there are like in production models for some GW stuff, I'll sometimes go to 3D printers and stuff on like Etsy or eBay or whatever and just have a look, because like it sometimes feels a bit better to pay a bit more to get a model that feels a bit cooler. So I don't really know. I think I definitely don't just buy everything. Like, I don't have like oh, this is a bit sad. I don't have the cash to be to be throwing around and buying all the stuff I need. So I'll kind of buy the stuff I want for the original list in the most like efficient way I can, whether that's in terms of like in terms of like the money outlay, or if just like getting cooler models for maybe a little bit more, because I think it is worth it. Like, if you've got some cool models and you paint them up and put them on the table, it feels good.
So I think just two final follow-up questions to that. Do you think then that there are aspects to armies which you just won't do because they're like just too much money to start off with? So, for example, would you never do like a full Rohan Royal Guard mounted list just because you're like, you know what, it's just never going to be worth buying those models because they're so expensive?
I think if I was to play the faction for a long time and decide that I liked the play style that would suit those, it becomes easier to justify. But I think diving straight in and, buying everything you could possibly need is just not something I particularly want to do. Like, I think I get it more from maybe like a collecting standpoint. If you want to buy all the models and paint them all in one go in batches, that kind of makes a bit more sense, but that's just not how I do my painting. So, yeah.
And then the final follow-up question to the previous stuff. why do you think it is that you have like dipped your toe into lots of different armies and not just stuck with one? Because obviously price is like an element, I think, for everyone. But you could have stuck with one army and expanded massively on that one rather than like, having lots of smaller forces. So why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because like, I guess there's two ways to end up with a big collection, which I think is kind of maybe what you're alluding to here. You either have lots of a small number of things, or you have a small amount of lots of things. And I think I have a small amount of lots of things. I think I just struggle to like. I really struggle to motivate myself to paint a lot of one thing. I think is ultimately the answer. Like, I'm trying to think of what armies I have that even approximate to a horde army. I mean, maybe the Tale of Three Wargamers Mordor army is probably the closest I've actually come to collecting a horde. But yeah, since then it's been like quite hero heavy and elite forces. So maybe it's just I enjoy painting a small amount of models fairly quickly and then getting them on the table. Maybe that's it. There's some logic there.
There we go. That was what
I disagree. I disagree.
Yeah, disagree strongly with his ideas. Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for joining me for this chat. It's been quite a serious video, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I just, I think it's a chat that I thought would be good to have, especially because so much of what's on YouTube is focused around list building, competitive, like you need these models, and no one really talks about like actually the collecting and the like why you go into an army in the first place side. It's all just kind of like you're doing Minas Tirith, well, this is what you must get, rather than kind of what the reality is for most people in the hobby, which is that they don't actually do that, at least not to start with. Cool. Right. We will be back with more videos at some point. Drop us a like, a comment on how you go about collecting your armies, what maybe you're working on at the moment and why you did it. I think it'd be interesting.
Is there an army you regret collecting?
Yeah, we'll get OT in the chat for that one. Every army he owns, pretty much, he seems to end up regretting. But yeah, so yeah, it's bye from Mayor.
Goodbye.
It's bye from Sebastian.
Goodbye.
It's bye from OT with his dreadful audio.
And no one will notice.
And it is goodbye from me. Goodbye.